Friends, welcome to another episode of Auto Afflicted. Today we're doing big brakes for the Audi C5. This is a 6-piston Brembo caliper and a 345 by 32 rotor. These are off a Cayenne and the rotors come off a Benz. I'm going to share with you guys all the knowledge that I gathered on the internet of how to do 18Zs, how to do 17Zs also. These are the brake calipers I'm talking about. You can get these brakes fitted onto Audis, Volkswagens, I think BMWs and Subarus. So I'm going to share links and knowledge for all of that so you can build out your own big brake kit. And I'm going to show you exactly how we modify these calipers and rotors to fit on my 4.2 V8 Audi C5. Let's get into it. Brembo Big Brake Kit, 17Z, 18Z, fits on Audis, Volkswagens, BMWs, also maybe on Subarus. They respect on a whole bunch of cars, so there's a lot of different ways to mount these up, but this is kind of the total DIY setup, so no one had the information that I wanted. Unfortunately, my friends who make these big brake kits, they had lost their specs for the 4.2 V8, so I wasn't able to pull the knowledge from them, and I had to go out and figure this stuff out myself, pretty much for the most part. But I have included links to Rotor Labs, who makes these big brake kits for all the Audis, Volkswagens, maybe BMWs too. They do the machining, they already know what works and what doesn't work, so you can get a little from them, hardware, or as much as a full brake kit, and I believe their kits are like $1,000. Right now I'm into this one, $200 for the calipers, $200 for the rotors. I believe I'm $100 on the hard lines and $115 on the hardware, and then there's some other incidentals like brake fluid and stuff, and grinding materials, things like that. But I'm around like $600 for a big brake kit. In my mind, that's pretty rad. And yeah, for another $400, I could have solved all my problems, not spent months learning about it, and had a nice plug and play setup. But I like to DIY, the money savings is part of it, and then just the learning and the problem solving is a whole nother part of it for me. So as far as the prices go for these things, sometimes if you're lucky, you can find these calipers in a junkyard. They come off of Porsche Cayennes, they come off of Q7 Audis, they're also on Tourigs, but of course they only say Porsche on the Porsche. Now I found these 18Zs on eBay, they were $180 and they were delivered free, so it was kind of a no-brainer to pull the trigger on that. And then of course, that same week after I'd bought them, I was at the junkyard and they brought out a Tourig and it had 17Zs on the front of it, so I had to take them. At a junkyard, you're probably $35, $40 a caliper, so I'm in about 80 on this. Bigger brakes are better, right? Mostly that's true. The reason we're going to bigger brakes is because we want better stopping power. The Audi has very inferior brakes in my opinion, and I'll show you why. So bigger is better statement is not always true. What you're looking for is more swept area. So your swept area is going to be comprised of this portion of your rotor and your brake pads. Now if you look at these Audi, this is the Audi setup, so this was like this. I don't know why Audi did this, but they chose to do 4 pads in their caliper. I don't know if it's for heat dissipation or something, but essentially they, in my opinion, reduced their swept area, their potential swept area on this rotor by 1/3. And what I can tell you is these brakes, even under moderate canyon driving with not very aggressive braking into the corners, I was getting bad brake fade. Brake fade comes from a couple things. So you can heat up the whole system, the caliper and all of that, and then your fluid starts to boil and gives you less total hydraulic advantage. Or the other thing that happens is you build up actual heat and gases between the rotor and the pad, and the heat and gas is actually pushing the pad away from the rotor, which seems crazy, but that's something that happens, and so you can get brake fade that way. That's the swept area, not very good. So compare that to the swept area we're going to have now with a bigger rotor. So now we're going to be fitting a pad that's this big. So not only have we increased the overall potential swept area from the previous rotor, but we've put a pad on that whole surface. And these are cross-drilled, so that's going to allow ventilation of the gases into the center and then flowing out of the fins. Basic brake technology. And not only that, but I believe the old Audi pistons, the old calipers had dual piston, and I think they only even push in from one side. And so now we're upgrading to 6 pistons and a bigger aluminum caliper. So this should handle the heat better. The pistons are going to increase braking pressure. We've got more swept area, and we're stepping up in the rotor size. Now this is where it becomes super important. So 18Zs are known to go up to 350 millimeter brakes, and on most of the cars that the 18Zs are spec'd on, they do use 350 millimeter brakes. Now when you bolt them to an Audi, in particular the C5 chassis, I can confirm this, when you bolt them to a C5 chassis, the max rotor size is now 345. 350s are no longer going to work. So that's something to keep in mind. And that's a little bit of knowledge that I gleaned from the internet that was kind of hiding to a certain degree, because people just talk about the big brakes. They know the 18Zs go to 350, but they don't actually know what their rotor size is that they're using with that. Now, there's also a 17Z option, which I happen to have. 17Z, Brembo, it's another 6 piston, and these ones will actually bolt up to a C5 chassis with the existing rotors. Now, you have to remember that the existing rotors on these Audis, most of these Audis that you're putting a big brake kit on, is only actually a 30 millimeter width in the rotor. And these do require 32 millimeter wide rotors. Now people do use the stock 30 millimeter rotor. What you have to be careful of is if you were to wear your brake pads all the way down to the max, you might be having your pistons coming out further than they were supposed to from the brake caliper themselves. So that's pretty questionable. I do have a 32 millimeter rotor here. Now what I've done is, through extensive research, I've figured out that the 18Z can work with a Mercedes rotor. I was not able to find an Audi rotor that was cross-drilled 345 millimeter and had the right hat height for me. So the important thing to note when you're trying to cobble together a swap is this measurement, the hat height. So this is basically from the inside motor side of the rotor to the top of the hat where it mounts to the hub. This is your hat height. Now, the 4.2 V8 that I have, the Audi, I want to say, I have to look it up. I'll put the numbers up here, but I believe it's like a 50, I think it was a 52.5 was the hat height. And so I was able to find rotors that were taller hat height, which would push the inner part of the rotor into the dust shield on the hub of the car, or I can find ones that have a slightly shallower hat height than what my stock car had, and in that case I have to make a modification to bring the caliper over, because now my rotor disc is sitting a little more outboard from the engine, and it's going to conflict with the caliper. So what we do to mitigate that is we're actually machining the ears, the inner ears where they mount, and I'm machining 3 millimeters off here. So originally the width here was 20 millimeters, and I'm machining it down to 17. Now I don't have a machine shop, so I'm going old school with a dial caliper so I can get accurate measurement, and then I'm using a die grinder, and I don't have my other grinder, but I have a handheld grinder with a flap disc on it, and those things are what I'm going to use to take this all down. Doing it this way, you want to be careful. You want to go slow. You can't add material back, so you don't want to take more material than you need, and you need to keep it very consistent. You can have a little bit of variation, but as you'll see later in the video, if you don't grind the ears flat, then your caliper is going to sit askew on your rotor, and you're going to have conflicts with the wheel, maybe conflicts with the brake pad and the rotor in the caliper, all of those things. With the Mercedes rotors, it is a 5x112, so you're set there, but interestingly enough, the inner hub of the Audi, right here, where the rotor mates up to the hub, is bigger on the Audi than the Mercedes. So it's only a few mils, and what we're gonna do is take a 3-inch flap disc, flap cylinder on a drill, or you can put it on your die grinder, and we're gonna just work it in here and then grind that open a little bit. You just do it a little bit at a time, as you'll see coming up here. I'm gonna show you how we do that. We're gonna grind it a little bit at a time until it fits perfect. Now, bigger is better, right? Bigger is not always better, so there's other things to consider here. So we've got unsprung weight that we're potentially adding to this project. Stock setup is 34.8. The Brembo setup is coming in at 42 pounds. We're definitely gaining weight, so my lap times on the track are gonna go down. Not that I'm really going to the track, but if you're adding weight, unsprung weight, suspension's gonna move heavier, and in general, you've got more weight to move in the car. So really, the best option would probably been to go with the 17Z caliper, which is a little smaller, run the stock size 330 millimeter rotor with some upgraded aggressive pads, and that probably would have gotten me as much stopping power as I needed. But I found these silver Porsche calipers, and they said Porsche on them, so obviously I had to go with the 18Z setup to have the cool Porsche branding on my car. That way people can know how special my car is, right? Instagram, whatever. The other thing that you need to make this kit work is some hardware, because now you're going from the original mounting setup that the Audi came with to the setup that the Brembos work with. And so I chose to go to JH Motorsport and buy their setup, their hardware. It comes with everything you need. It's the right size. It also has these, which is really why I paid the money. So this is a bushing. It's a 14 mil inner and a 16 mil outer diameter, and that goes into the caliper ear here. So that'll go all the way in there, and that takes up the space from the bolt, because these Brembos use a larger bolt than the Audi uses. And so if you were to use the same size bolts that go through the Audi ears, you would have slop and your caliper would float around. So I chose to simplify the process and not have to go find these bushings. I don't know if they get them made. I didn't know the actual dimensions of them, so it was going to be a process. This hardware kit did cost about $115 delivered, but honestly, I feel like it was money well spent because there's no guesswork. It's the hardware I need. I also bought their hard lines, which are for this big brake kit. Works with the Audi, bolts up to the Brembo, and steel lines, right? That's what you want. So we got those. Like I said, link in the description to Rotor Lab's, link in the description to the Audi Design article I found that talks about doing all of this, and all the information that you're going to need if you want to cobble together your own kit or buy direct from one of the manufacturers like JH Motorsport, 2 Bennett Automotive, or Rotor Labs. That'll all be linked in the description, so y'all can jump in there. But now let's go ahead and get this thing cracking so I can have some big brakes that I can tell my friends about. All right, so the thing about the calipers from the Porsche Cayenne is that they sit on the front of the rotor like this. So if the car is traveling this way, they're front mounted, so bleeder on top. But on the Audi, they're going to mount here. So now the bleeder is on the bottom. And you say, well, why don't you just take the other caliper and flip it over? But the pistons are staggered. They go small, medium, large. So they're supposed to go that way, and that's why you can't invert the caliper. So pretty simple solution. We're just going to crack off the lines and install them on the opposite sides. All right, so we got it totally covered in caustic brake fluid, but we did get it switched up. So now we've got bleeders on top, crossovers on the bottom. Now we're ready for proper install and bleed. And I should probably just clean these up a little bit before I mount them on the car so it's a little bit easier to deal with. Right, so the first thing we need to do before we can test fit the caliper is we have to get the rotor on there. And because I'm using Mercedes rotors, there is a little bit of clearancing to do on the rotor itself. So the Audi hub, surprisingly, is it's like 68 on the caliper, but the Mercedes hub of the rotor is like 66. So we're going to take just a 3-inch flap disc, barrel flap disc. Take this 3-inch flap disc and the drill. Make sure your equipment is tight or it won't work properly, obviously. So it won't take too long, but you want to just take your time. I'm going to do it, maybe 20 seconds, test, fit, 20 seconds, test, fit. You don't want it to oversize it or it'll be loose on the hub and that'll be no good. So you just get it in there. This will go a lot faster with the die grinder, but I just want to do it here next to the car, take it slow. So not quite there yet. Try it out again. Getting closer. It feels almost flush. You want it to sit totally flat on the hub though, so I'm going to clean this up a little bit more in here. And then I did actually take the flap disc and I ran the flap disc around the hub. I already did that once, but just to clean up any corrosion there so you get a good fit. So we're only taking a couple mils out of here. It's not a big deal. No need to run to the machine shop. Ah, there we go. That feels, yeah, totally snug. Does it? Yeah, that feels snug. So now I'm gonna run a couple studs in here. This will just help hold the rotor in place while I get to test fitting with the caliper. And just go ahead and use a little dugga. All right, so that's on. Let's grab the caliper and see how that's looking. So hopefully you took your time and you worked your caliper nice and slow. Because if you didn't get these ears right, this is going to be a problem. Everything's got to be basically flat how it started so that it mates up nice. Otherwise, you're going to have some conflict between the wheel or the disc. Could be something. So I am running 18s, and the 18z's fit within 18s, but it's very tight. So if your caliper is not on nice and straight, it could hit the rim. So here we go with a test fit. One in. This hardware is a little tricky to work with. The original stuff was nice because it just bolted the bolts into the caliper and it all holds together nice. This, you're dealing with a weird nut and bolt setup, but I've kind of figured out how it likes to work for me. All right, so here it is, mounted up. It looks pretty good actually, and the clearancing that we did on the post here, you can see clears, and then down in there, where's that one? Right there. That one clears, but if you look from the top down here, we can see it's not quite square to the rotor, and it needs to come a couple degrees like this. So I'm going to pull the caliper off and grind the inner ears just a little bit to get it to rotate ever so slightly. We want it to correct to be square, like this, not like this. Right, so it's in here, it's this portion right here that's a little too high by maybe not even half a mil, and that's causing the caliper to get cocked up a little bit. So just gonna grind off a nano right there, just some nanomillimeters. All right, ears are ground. Check the fit. It's looking nice and square, so happy. All right, so now looking at the caliper, first person in the comments to tell me what still needs to be done to this caliper before we're ready to put in pads and bolt all this up together will get an Auto Afflicted t-shirt. So if you know what still needs to be done to this caliper, drop it in the comments, and the one with the earliest timestamp will get a t-shirt. So there you go. So one of the modifications we got to do is, because the Audi and the Porsche brake pads have different sensor attachments, we're going to clip the Audi sensor attachment off of the old Audi brake pads and wire it to the Porsche brake pads. So I'm just finishing that up here. Wiring is really not that important because it's just sending a signal from when the pads touch to let you know that your brake wear sensor has made contact and it's time to replace the brakes. So there's not really a positive or negative to worry about. Just connect two wires, make sure they're going to stay together, whether you solder, twist, tape. I'm crimping and using heat shrink tubing just because that's what I have available to me. All right, so after all the milling and grinding, bolted up, slipped the pads in, bled the brakes. Not going to show you how to bleed brakes. There's 1,000 videos on how to bleed brakes, but check it out. 345 millimeter, 32 wide, 6 piston Brembos with the Porsche logo, so Instagram ready. Pedal feels really nice. I'm going to bolt up the 19s and see how the stopping power is, because like I said, the previous brakes, total garbage. Audi engineers, what were you thinking? But Porsche, Brembo, we're in there. So super excited. It's been a really long journey, and here we are. Looks amazing, as you can see. Not only is this going to be a great benefit to my canyon driving, but it's going to be a pretty big flex out on the street when you look over at my crusty Audi and you see these massive brakes. So, like I said in the beginning, all the information to find Rotor Lab stuff, 2 Bennett brakes, JH Motorsport brakes, all that stuff linked in the description as ever. I appreciate you guys checking it out. You know, love the ones you're with, use your signals when you're driving. I'd say respect everyone's builds, but if you're building a Tesla, it's whatever. So y'all be well, and we'll catch you on the next one.